Welcome to Stillwater Chronicles. Tonight, we settle into a story about a tide that went out and did not come back. There is a particular silence that belongs only to low tide, not the silence of a room or a forest or a held breath, but something older and wider. The silence of a harbor when the water has pulled back to reveal the mud, dark and glistening, smelling of salt and iron and things that have been buried a long time. The boats sit tilted on their keels. The mooring ropes go slack. The iron rings in the harbor wall hang empty, and the chains that once swayed with the current now rest on wet stone, perfectly still. That is the silence that settled over Kermarc 11 days ago. And it has not lifted since. Kermarc is a small place, a village on the coast of Brittany, tucked between granite headlands that were old before anyone thought to name them. The houses are built from the same gray stone as the cliffs. Shutters are painted the blue of rope and sky. There is one church, one bakery, one bar that also serves as a post office on Tuesday mornings. The streets are narrow and crooked and smell, when the wind is right, of fish and bread and low cloud. For 300 years, the tide has come and gone twice a day. The fishermen set their lives by it. The departure, the return, the careful counting of hours between. The children grew up knowing the rhythm, the way they knew their own heartbeats. Indisputable. Automatic. As reliable as breathing. On the morning of the 12th of October, the tide went out, and it did not come back. By the second day, people were watching the harbor from the wall, not speaking much, just standing with their hands in their jacket pockets and their eyes on the mud, waiting. You could see the expressions they were trying to hold. Calm, reasonable, unbothered. This had happened before, someone said. Somewhere, in some other century. There were tidal anomalies. There were explanations. By the fourth day, the explanations had grown quieter. By the seventh, no one was making them anymore. The mud had dried at the edges. The boats leaned at their angles like old men too tired to stand upright. The smell had deepened. No longer just salt and iron, but something beneath those things. Something darker and older. The smell the sea leaves behind when it has been away long enough to let the world below it breathe. The priest, Father Morvant, said the sea was waiting. He said this from the church steps on the 6th day, his voice steady, his hands folded. He said that the natural world, like the human soul, sometimes needed to pause before it could continue. He said they should pray. He believed it, probably. He was a man who needed the world to have intentions. Margot did not go to the church steps. She sat in her chair by the window that faced the harbor, as she had sat for more mornings than anyone else in Kermarc could count. And she watched the mud, and she said nothing for a long time. Margot was 91 years old. She had been born in this house. This same house, in the same room, with the same granite walls and the same north-facing window, in the winter of 1933. Her husband had died at sea. Her son had moved to Lyon and called on Sundays. She had outlasted 3 boats, 2 mayors, and every other person in Kermarc who had known the village before the war. On the 8th day, her neighbor's daughter, a young woman named Solène, who sometimes brought Margot bread and sometimes stayed to sit, asked her what she thought it meant. Margot looked at her for a moment. Then she looked back at the window. "The priest says the sea is waiting," Solène said. Margot made a small sound. Not agreement. Not quite dismissal. Something in between. "What do you think?" Solène asked. Margot's hands were in her lap. Her fingers were very still. She was quiet for long enough that Solène thought she hadn't heard. Then she said, "The sea is not waiting." Solène waited for more. Nothing came. She brought the bread and left it on the table and went home. On the 11th day, Solène came back. The light was different that morning. Not cloudy, not bright, but flat. The kind of flat light that seems to come from everywhere and nowhere, that makes shadows disappear and distances impossible to judge. The mud in the harbor was the color of pewter. The tilted boats cast no shadows. The harbor wall was empty of people for the first time in days. Solène let herself in, as she always did, and set the bread on the table and looked toward the window chair. Margot was there. Her hands were in her lap. Her eyes were open, looking at the harbor. "Good morning," Solène said. Margot did not answer. This was not unusual. Sometimes she was very far away in the mornings, Solène knew, not sleeping exactly, but somewhere between the present room and some other time she had lived in. Some long ago, morning in the same chair, with the same window, when the harbor had been full of water, and the boats had rocked at their moorings, and the men had gone out before dawn. Solène moved to the window and looked out at the harbor. The mud, the tilted boats, the still ropes, the flat pewter light reflecting off nothing. She stood there for a while, not speaking. There was nothing to say about it. You could look at it. You had looked at it every day for 11 days. And still the looking told you nothing. The harbor was simply empty. And the emptiness had its own weight, its own particular gravity. The way a room feels different when someone important has left it and has not yet returned. "It used to come in so fast," Margot said. Solène turned. Margot was still looking at the window, her gaze unchanged. "When I was a child," Margot said, "you could watch it come in. You could stand on the wall and watch the line of it moving across the mud, gray-green, fast, faster than you thought water could move. My mother said, never to stand on the lower steps when the tide was turning. The sea could be at the horizon and at your ankles in the same breath." She paused. Her voice was very calm. It had always been calm. A voice that had been through enough things that it no longer needed to perform its feelings. "I have been trying to remember," she said, "the last time I heard it. The water on the steps. The sound of the boats pulling at their ropes." Solène looked at her. "And?" she said. Margot was quiet for a moment. "I cannot remember," she said. "It has been so many years that the memory is just a feeling. A sound I knew so well that I stopped hearing it." She paused. "That is the way it is, with the things that are always there. You stop noticing them. And then one day—" She did not finish the sentence. Solène looked back at the harbor, the flat light, the mud, the boats sitting in their permanent lean. She thought suddenly about the sound of her own heart, that rhythm so constant, so unremarked, that she had never in her life actually stopped to listen for it. And she wondered, in the strange sideways way, the thoughts come on quiet mornings, what it would be like to reach for that sound one day and find it had gone while she was busy not noticing it. She pushed the thought away. Thoughts like that had no use in them. In the afternoon, the village gathered on the harbor wall without quite deciding to. People drifted there, the way people drift toward the sight of something they cannot explain, not expecting resolution, not even expecting answers, only finding that their feet had brought them to the one place where the absence was most visible. They stood along the wall in ones and twos, looking down at the mud. The fishermen stood with their arms folded. The old women stood with their hands clasped. Father Morvant stood near the church end of the wall and said nothing, which was somehow worse than his talk of waiting. The mud stretched away from them to the horizon. This was the thing that Solène had not fully taken in until now, standing at the wall's edge and looking outward. On every previous day she had looked down, at the harbor, at the boats, at the close familiar mud. But standing here, looking outward, she could see how far back it had gone. The sea was not somewhere just over a small distance. The sea was not visible at all. Just mud. Just the flat pewter color of it, stretching away and away and away until it met the flat pewter sky, without a seam between them. Someone near her said, quietly, "Where has it gone?" No one answered. Solène looked along the wall and found Margot. She had not known Margot was here, had not seen her make the walk from her house, but there she was, standing very upright near the old iron ring at the far end, her gray coat buttoned to the collar, her hands at her sides. She was not looking at the mud. She was looking at the ring, that iron ring, older than anyone, set into the granite for a purpose no living person remembered, its rope long gone, its metal dark with salt and age. Solène made her way along the wall to stand beside her. They stood together without speaking. Below them, the mud was perfectly still. The air smelled of old salt and something underneath it. Earth or age, or the particular cold of things that the sun has not touched for a very long time. "You said the sea is not waiting," Solène said eventually. "What did you mean?" Margot looked at the iron ring for another moment. Then she looked out at the mud. "When I was young," she said, "my grandmother told me that the sea had been here before us and would be here after us. That the sea had no interest in us at all. Not kindness, not cruelty. Only its own business. Which was older than we could imagine and would continue long past the point when we had stopped being here to watch it." Solène waited. "I think she was right," Margot said. "The sea is not waiting for something from us. The sea is not punishing us. It is not angry. It is not grieving." She paused. "It simply no longer finds a reason to return. That is all. Not malice. Not mystery." Solène felt something cold and quiet move through her. Not panic, not quite. Just the particular coldness of a thought that has arrived without permission and will not leave. "How can you know that?" she said. Margot looked at her. Her eyes were very clear, the kind of clear that comes from having looked at many difficult things for a very long time. "I don't," she said simply. "But I have lived long enough to know the difference between something that is pausing and something that is finished. And this..." She did not gesture. She did not need to. The whole horizon was the gesture. This does not feel like a pause. That night, Solène could not sleep. She lay in her bed in the dark and listened. She had lived her whole life within earshot of the harbor. She had never known a night without the sound of water, the small rhythmic lapping against the stone steps, the quiet movement of the moored boats, the low intermittent clank of a chain. Sounds she had never noticed. Sounds that had been inside every night of her life, the way the sound of your own house is inside you. Present, nameless, unconscious. Now there was nothing. Just the silence that was not the silence of absence, but of something that had been and was no longer. A different quality of quiet. The quiet of an empty frame where a painting used to be. The quiet of a chair at a table where someone used to sit. She thought of Margot's words. Not malice, not mystery, just finished. She did not know what to do with that. She did not know how to hold a world in which the ancient, indifferent machinery of the earth could simply stop. Not because of them and not despite them. Just stop. She thought of all the things she had stopped noticing. The sound of the water, the rocking of the boats, the particular smell of the harbor at high tide. All the ordinary constants that had been so reliably present, she'd let them become invisible. She thought about what else she might have stopped noticing. At some point, without deciding to, she slept. In the morning, when she went to the window, the mud was still there. The sky was gray and low. The boat still leaned. The village was already gathering at the harbor wall, not because they expected anything, but because the wall was where you went. Because standing together at the edge of the emptiness was something, even when nothing could be done. She dressed and went down to the harbor. At the far end of the wall, Margot stood alone at the old iron ring, as she had the day before. Her gray coat buttoned, her hands at her sides, looking out at the mud that stretched to the horizon, and the sky that met it without a seam. She was not watching for the tide. She was not watching for anything. She was simply standing at the edge of something she had understood and could not change, looking at it with clear eyes, staying. Solène walked to stand beside her. They stood together in the gray morning light, and the mud stretched away from them, and the sky was very wide, and the iron ring was cold and still between them, and the village was quiet behind them. And if you had been watching from above, from somewhere high enough to see all of it, it might have looked, for a moment, like the world had always been exactly this. A wall, two women, the gray smell of old salt, and the long patient horizon, asking nothing. The tide did not come. The tide did not come. Thank you for listening to Stillwater Chronicles, where even the quietest shores can carry the deepest grief. If this stillness stayed with you, if the smell of old salt and the gray horizon settled somewhere inside, then let it remain a little while longer. Some tides, after all, were never meant to return. They were only ever meant to remind you what it felt like while they were here. Rest now,